October 5th, 2011, the world stopped. Not because a product launched, but because a voice disappeared. Steve Jobs, the visionary who taught us to think different, died quietly in his California home, surrounded by his family, his breath fading like the last flicker of light on a black screen. Apple's website turned to a single image, his face, black and white, beneath it. Two dates, 1955, 2011. Nothing more. No slogans, no marketing lines. Just silence. And somehow, that silence said everything. The man who had changed how the world communicated, how it listened, watched, and dreamed, was gone. But his presence was everywhere. In the glow of a phone, the hum of a laptop, the touch of glass beneath a fingertip. For decades, he had been the heartbeat of innovation. Brilliant, demanding, impossible, magnetic. He was loved, hated, feared, and admired in the same breath. And yet, beneath the legend, was a man searching for something deeper than success. Meaning. He once said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." And those words, uttered long before his death, became his epitaph. Because in the end, Steve Jobs wasn't just a CEO, he was a symbol of how one restless soul could bend the future and still die wondering if it was all worth it. On that autumn evening, as millions stared at their glowing Apple screens, the irony was haunting. The man who gave light to the world of technology had finally found his peace in darkness. Steve Jobs was born on February 24th, 1955 in San Francisco, California. But he was not meant to stay. His biological parents, two young students, decided they couldn't keep him. They gave him up for adoption before he ever saw the world. From the very beginning, Steve's story began with separation. Paul and Clara Jobs, a modest couple from Mountain View, took the baby home and named him Stephen Paul Jobs. They weren't rich, they weren't famous, but they gave him what every child needs: belief. Paul, a mechanic and machinist, taught him how things worked, how to take them apart, and more importantly, how to build them again. Clara gave him warmth, quiet patience, and the steady love he would spend his life chasing. In the California suburbs of the 1960s, young Steve grew up among circuit boards and dreams. The garage behind his family's home became his first laboratory. He would spend hours with his father, unscrewing radios, tinkering with wires, fascinated by how something invisible, electricity, could give life to machines. But school bored him. Rules irritated him. He questioned everything, challenged everyone. His teachers saw arrogance. In truth, it was hunger, a hunger to understand what others didn't even see. He once said, "I was smart enough to know I was different, but not wise enough to know why." At 13, he met a boy who would change his life, Steve Wozniak, the shy, kind-hearted genius who loved building as much as Jobs loved imagining. Two minds, one vision. They were opposites and perfect together. After high school, Jobs attended Reed College in Oregon. He dropped out after one semester. He slept on friends' floors, collected Coke bottles for food money, and wandered into classes that interested him: calligraphy, design, spirituality. He later said that dropping out was one of the best decisions he ever made. It freed him to learn what mattered. In that period of drifting and discovery, he traveled to India seeking wisdom, simplicity, enlightenment. He shaved his head, fasted, meditated, and returned not with religion, but with vision. He wanted to build something that mattered, something that would merge technology and beauty, logic and emotion, silicon and soul. The world didn't know it yet, but the child who had once been given away was about to give the world something it could never give back. The story of Apple began, fittingly, in a garage, the same kind of space where Steve Jobs first learned to dream. It was 1976. Jobs was 21, barefoot, intense, his mind racing faster than anyone around him could follow. Beside him, Steve Wozniak soldered circuits with quiet precision. Together they built something no one had asked for, and everything the world would one day need: the personal computer. They called it Apple, a name simple, human, unthreatening. In a world of machines and codes, Jobs wanted warmth. He wanted technology that felt alive. The first model, the Apple I, sold for $66,000, hand-assembled, built on wooden boards, sold from Jobs' parents' garage. It wasn't perfect, but it was revolutionary. Within a few years came the Apple II, a polished, beautiful machine that put computing into homes, schools, and imaginations. By his mid-20s, Steve Jobs was worth hundreds of millions. But money had never been the goal. Perfection was. He wanted every curve, every screw, every pixel to have purpose. He would yell at designers, redraw circuits, reject prototypes, not because he was cruel, but because he believed. He believed technology could be poetry. In 1984, Apple unveiled the Macintosh, a computer with a smile, friendly, intuitive, human. The world gasped. The commercial, directed by Ridley Scott, aired during the Super Bowl. On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. It wasn't just marketing, it was prophecy. But genius has a shadow. Behind the visionary stood a man impossible to please. His obsession with control, his perfectionism, his volatile temper, they built Apple and nearly destroyed it. By 1985, boardroom politics turned against him. The company he had created pushed him out. He was 30, rich beyond measure, and utterly broken. He said later, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to me." But at the time, it felt like death. He wandered. He built Next, a company that would fail commercially but redefine technology. He bought a small graphics studio and turned it into Pixar. There, surrounded by artists and storytellers, he rediscovered what he had lost: joy. In 1995, Toy Story became the first full-length computer-animated film in history. It changed cinema forever. And when Apple, struggling and directionless, bought Next in 1997, Steve Jobs came home. Different, calmer, wiser, still impossible, but now unstoppable. The years that followed were nothing short of mythic. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. Each launch a sermon, each product a revolution, each keynote a moment in history. He didn't just sell devices, he sold the future, one beautifully packaged dream at a time, and the world followed. By the late 2000s, Apple was no longer a company. It was a culture, a belief, a religion built on glass and aluminum. But beneath the black turtleneck and the thunder of applause, Steve Jobs was beginning to fade. The man who had given the world infinite connection was running out of time. By the time the iPhone changed the world in 2007, Steve Jobs was already fighting a war inside his own body. Pancreatic cancer, a rare, slow-moving kind, had begun to consume him years earlier. He tried to hide it. He wore the same black turtleneck, the same calm smile, but his frame grew thinner, his voice quieter. He refused traditional treatment at first. Instead, he turned to diets, herbs, fasting, silence. He believed in intuition, in the idea that the body, like a machine, could reset itself, but intuition could not cure biology. And by the time he accepted surgery, the cancer had already spread. Still, he worked, obsessively. Each new product became a race against time, each keynote a battle between genius and mortality. The world cheered, unaware that the man on stage was living on borrowed hours. Those who knew him closely saw the change. He became softer, not in vision, but in heart. He spent more time with his wife, Lorene, and their children, Reed, Aaron, and Eve. He spoke less about technology, more about meaning. He had once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." But now he wondered what that change had cost him. His colleagues recalled how, in quiet moments, he would just stare at the prototypes in his hands, the devices that had made him immortal, and whisper, "They're beautiful." There was pride in that whisper, but also regret. The drive that had built Apple had also pushed people away. Friends, partners, his first daughter, Lisa. He had been absent when she was young, too consumed by creation to see what he was losing. Years later, they reconciled, but too late to rewrite time. In his final years, he carried that silence like a weight. Even his employees saw the cracks. He would erupt in meetings, then fall into silence. his energy fading mid-sentence. He refused to slow down. His body was failing, but his mind was incandescent, a fire that refused to go out. He became reflective. He spoke to Stanford graduates in 2005 and said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life." It wasn't philosophy, it was confession. He knew the empire he'd built would outlive him, but he also knew the one thing he could never control: the end. In his last years, he began to seek stillness. He read about Zen, sat in silence, looked at the ocean from his California home. He learned to say thank you more often. He called old friends. He told his children he loved them. The man who had spent his life inventing the future was learning at last how to be present. When asked if he feared death, he said softly, "No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet death is the destination we all share." He paused, then added, almost to himself, "It clears out the old to make way for the new." In those final years, Steve Jobs understood what even his genius could not fix: that life, like every product, has an end. When Steve Jobs died, the world didn't just lose an entrepreneur. It lost its most human mirror. He wasn't a saint. He wasn't gentle. But he was real. And in a century of noise, that truth was revolutionary. His legacy lives in more than the devices he built. It lives in the way people think, the way they touch, see, and feel the world through design. He redefined the relationship between humans and machines and made technology emotional. Before Jobs, computers were cold, gray, functional. After him, they became extensions of the soul, sleek, intuitive, alive. The iPhone wasn't just a phone, it was a mirror of human desire, curiosity, and connection. He didn't sell products. He sold simplicity. He sold meaning. Every Apple launch was theater, every sentence a meditation. He spoke few words, but each one carried precision, rhythm, beauty. He made millions feel that they were part of something larger, not consumers, but believers. Under his leadership, Apple became the most valuable company in the world, worth over $1 trillion. But the numbers never mattered to him. He once told his team, "We don't build things to make money. We make money to build better things." That, more than anything, was the heartbeat of his empire. He left behind not just Apple, but Pixar, a studio that gave life to toys, fish, monsters, robots, and memories. Films like Toy Story, Finding Nemo, Up, Wall-E, each carried a trace of him. His perfectionism, his childlike wonder, his longing for connection. In their laughter and their tears, Pixar carried his spirit. After his death, tributes came from every corner of the world. Tim Cook, his successor, said, "Steve's spirit will forever be the foundation of Apple." Barack Obama called him one of America's greatest innovators. But perhaps the truest tribute came not from a president or a CEO. It came from a 12-year-old child writing online. "He made the world smaller, and he made my dreams bigger." That was his real empire. Not the stock prices, not the patents, not the glass cube stores. It was imagination. He made the invisible visible. He made the impossible feel inevitable. Yet even in greatness, there was contradiction. Steve Jobs gave the world connection and died questioning whether technology would separate us instead. He once said to his biographer, "Sometimes I wonder if I've done more harm than good. We've made tools for connection, but what if they isolate people instead?" It was a rare confession, spoken not by a CEO, but by a father. Because in the end, what mattered to him most was not the empire he built, but the love he left behind. Lorene, his wife, said that during his final days, he would look at his children, smile, and repeat the same words: "Stay hungry, stay foolish." But then, in a whisper, he'd add, "Stay kind." And maybe that was the hidden line beneath every product, every vision, every dream: kindness. The world still turns with his touch, a touch of glass, a swipe, a press. But his true fingerprint is not on the screen. It's on the human heart, that restless part of us that believes we can still make things better. October 5th, 2011. Palo Alto was quiet. Inside a modest house, sunlight fell across white sheets, the hum of machines steady, unbroken. Steve Jobs lay surrounded by his family, Lorene, Reed, Aaron, and Eve. The people who had always been there, even when the world took more of him than he could give. He looked at them one last time, and according to his sister Mona, his final words were simple, awed, almost childlike. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. No one knows what he saw. A vision, a memory, or maybe just peace. But in those three quiet words, there was the same wonder that had driven him all his life. He was 56, too young to go, too brilliant to be forgotten. The news broke around the globe in seconds. People wept in subway cars, left flowers outside Apple stores, lit candles beside their glowing iPhones. It wasn't the death of a man. It was the end of an era, the passing of the world's last true dreamer. In the days that followed, thousands of tributes poured in, from presidents, artists, rivals, and fans. But none captured him fully. Because how do you describe a man who changed everything and still never stopped questioning himself? Laurene Powell Jobs later said, he didn't see himself as a great man. He saw himself as a work in progress. And perhaps that's what made him great, that even at the height of his genius, he remained unfinished. Today, more than a decade later, his name is still everywhere, but his presence is quieter. In the curve of a design, the click of a mouse, the spark of an idea. He has become a whisper in the background of the modern world, a reminder that perfection isn't about power. It's about purpose. He once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe." And he did. But the dent he left wasn't just technological. It was emotional. He made us believe in creativity again. He made us believe that art and engineering could share the same heartbeat. Standing at his grave in Alta Mesa Memorial Park, there is no monument, no statue, no glowing Apple logo. Just earth, simple, human, exactly as he wanted. And yet, in that simplicity, his story continues. In every young dreamer hunched over a laptop, in every garage where someone imagines a better world, in every person who dares to think differently. Because Steve Jobs didn't just give us tools, he gave us permission. Permission to be bold, permission to be strange, permission to fail beautifully. And now, as the light fades on his story, one question remains. A question he asked perhaps with his final breath. What will we build before our own time runs out? And will it make the world not just smarter, but kinder? The screen dims, the music fades, and somewhere in that quiet, Steve Jobs still dreams.